Start. All right, I see the recording button is on.
Good afternoon. I am going to call this meeting of the Policy, Rules, and Research Committee of the Youth Development Council to order.
All right, thank you, Zan. Melissa, will you please do the roll call? Or do we not? Are we doing roll call? I feel like this just came up at the last committee meeting I attended.
Okay, we are doing roll call. Thank you for the committee meetings. Can you see the agenda before I do the roll? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Zan Ojiro.
Present.
Eric Cardella. Harissa Chanrami.
Here.
Celeste Jansen. Diana Rojas. Liz Thorne. Not present. And then today we have Jenny joining us, which is fantastic. And am I missing anyone else on my screen? I think that's it. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks. We'll welcome everyone to this Policy, Rules, and Research Committee meeting. We have not had one in a while, but I was eager to get us all back together. Have a few fun things to talk about today, as you can see on the agenda. The strategic plan, we'll talk a little bit about what was shared out a couple of weeks ago, kind of a preview for what we'll talk about with the full council. I actually want to share what we have for our committee purpose statement. We never officially adopted one, and so we had something kind of scratched out on the notes, so we've done some work on that and want to put that before the committee for review. Talk a little bit about some within that context, some of the tasks or roles that the committee might take on as we move forward. I see Diana has joined us. Welcome, Diana.
Hi all.
Thanks for being here. Just doing a quick agenda review. The last thing we have on here is a legislative session update, and then we'll have some time for public comment if we have any members of the public join and request to comment. I don't think we have anyone on right now, any guests attending that I can see. Is that correct, Melissa?
That is correct. Thank you.
I guess before I get into the strategic plan update, is there anything that I think that's all we do in the first thing here? I think we're good to move on to that, but I want to make sure because again, I haven't done a committee meeting myself in a while. So any other comments or questions? Otherwise, I will start talking about strategic plan. All right. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. Oh, well, and you can also see it on your screen. This document was shared out by email to the council a few weeks ago. Not going to review this document in depth, but wanted to just have it available for your reference. I just thought it would be good. I don't think that actually is a link, is it? It's not, sorry. I just typed text into the box. Let me try this again.
I can work on sharing it if you want to continue.
I got it. Sorry about that. I was having some click problems. But I wanted to just kind of provide a quick overall update on where we're at in the work on our strategic plan, what this document is. There are also some questions that I want to share with the group. I actually want to put these questions out. We want to share this with the council when we meet in a couple of weeks, but I wanted to maybe share them here first, get responses to the questions, see if there's ways we can refine these. But the hope is these questions can give the council an opportunity to guide us to some of the next steps in the strategic planning process. So first, just a note on the document here. So I feel like everyone here attended our retreat and participated in that work. We had a lot of great stuff that was generated in the conversations at the retreat. The SWAT, the activity in particular, there were a ton of ideas, a lot of questions, a lot of possibilities that came up there. It took everything that was prioritized through the stickers that everyone dutifully affixed to the notes and created a document where we pulled all of those priorities in, ranked them, and then tried to sort them into some common categories, things that were related bodies of work, tried to sort of reduce the duplication. There were a number of things that came up with different wording or even identical wording in different places. So we did our best to condense the numerous ideas that were prioritized into this document that we shared. The idea of this document is not necessarily to say this is a draft of the strategic plan. Hopefully, some of this can start to generate direction for that plan. But it was really just to reflect back some of the stuff that really resonated with folks at the retreat. So I thought maybe just to start before we kind of dive into some of the questions that I want to share, I wanted to give the committee members a second if you've had an opportunity to look at this, or if you've just even glanced at it, if you have any immediate responses, thoughts, reflections that you'd be willing to share right now, and I'll open it up for that conversation.
Hey,
Well-
Cord, sorry, just real quick. I think it was a SharePoint link that you shared in the chat. So Melissa's helping us get a link to the document.
Sorry.
So right now we just see what your screen is sharing.
It was sent out by Brian by email last week.
Oh, perfect. I'll check for that. Thank you.
So I looked for that and found it. But I have to confess that although it's been on my list of things to do, I'm actually looking at the document for the first time today. So, unfortunately, it's difficult to provide feedback on because I have not taken the time to do a deep dive. I like the way it's organized, and I'm thinking that I will be looking primarily at the categories and priorities piece. That's an awful lot, and we have a lot of prioritization to do.
Thanks, Ann, and thanks, Parsa. I just grabbed the link that I had in my annotated agenda, which was after years still of using it, I cannot ever seem to pick the right link to share that everyone can access. So, yeah, I think the hardest part of this document is the whittling down. I think I got it to like just under 6 pages. That's a lot of stuff. I dropped like one of the first questions in the chat, which is kind of a funny one in light of that comment. One of the things I ask is what's something missing that you think is important to bring in? So we have all this stuff and I am wondering what we've missed. Although I think that it's probably also pretty important to think about how we can refine. So this is, I'll be sharing the questions kind of in chunks. One of the first questions that we wanted to share with folks for discussion is just, what here is resonating with you? Is there anything surprising, anything that you think is missing? And as we're kind of moving from this to the actual content of the plan, we just want to make sure that we are elevating the important stuff and not losing anything in the process that we really need to include. And then I'm going to share another set of questions that are kind of around. One of the things that Brian and I have talked a little bit about is in terms of next steps on actually developing the plan, like what the council would actually like to do. We do want to kind of get a sense of what folks are feeling in terms of, these questions I've just posted, how much time together for the council and the division folks might feel that we need, what for individuals feels like the best way for them to be engaged. Do we want to have more in-person time? How much of that and for what purposes should we do that? Are folks more inclined to move this forward virtually? I think that we want to be open to both possibilities and try to accommodate both interests. Another question I've dropped in here is what the council might like to see in terms of community engagement. We can, develop a community engagement plan around this and pursue it, but we want to make sure that if there are specific voices or perspectives that the council would like to get on what we develop, that we make sure and include that and find a way to do that well. So I'll actually, I think for these questions, I'd like to just see if what folks' initial reaction is in terms of what you individually would want to do as far as level of engagement and involvement in plan development over the next few months. Again, the goal would be to develop a plan this spring and into the summer, and then in summer and early fall to do some community engagement and to have a final plan ready for the council to approve by December 2024.
I can provide some immediate feedback. Looking at the two questions at the top of page 3 of the document, who are the racial, ethnic, and underserved groups who are positively and negatively affected by the things we've identified? And what's the potential for things identified in the SWOT for strengthening or improving youth well-being, etc.? That first question, I think having the answer to that, and not just on a statewide level, but maybe on a regional level, which populations are face the most disparity and are the most underserved, that would change the way I answered some of the questions about council engagement. So it would be very helpful to have that. And when you're talking about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats exercise, is that what generated the buckets? Okay.
Yeah, about like 95% of the stuff that's in those categories came from the SWOT. There were some things that came up in the conversations following the lightning talks, and there were some the responses from the big questions piece that the first activity we did at the retreat. Those I captured in there's like a document behind this that has like everything in it, and those are there. But those were kind of, there may have been one or two things that actually felt like they could kind of move into this. Purpose of the retreat weren't really brought into the buckets here in these categories. So the vast majority was from the SWOT.
Okay. It's those are broad and diverse, and I think that the categories themselves could, if they were more refined, might make it easier to think about and juggle all of these things mentally. And I think some of them are kind of attitudinal and like collaboration, and some of them are very tangible, like grant programs. So I'm having a little bit of a hard time meshing in my mind how things could fit together. So I'm thinking we need to respond to this document as a council, but somehow need to winnow a little bit so that we can think about it more manageably.
That's helpful. Thank you.
This is Parsa, and just to kind of build off of what Zan was sharing on the different equity lens questions. I have a wondering around as part of our prioritization process, if we might want to consider what's our framework and lens of maybe having that short list of guiding questions. And perhaps we use that short list and guiding questions to go through each section to see, for example, I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't know if this would be one of the questions, is just thinking about is this a short-term, midterm, or long-term goal? And then the viability of it. So just using that, for example, as a guiding question, and going through each section. But of course, you probably want a set of core things that we're looking at that the council is able to have input on. And I think that could help with some level of prioritization. And perhaps could also help with some of the framing before the engagement efforts happen in July through September of this year. So that's something else I was thinking about as I was going through the document. And then go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just could you say a little more about like core things the council would be able to have input on? And is that in the sense of like, these are things that the council can most directly do or address?
I think that's part of it, right? Just understanding the scope of our role and responsibility and what's in our sphere of influence to impact. And if it's beyond that sphere, perhaps that's something we consider in partnership with another agency or another department. So that could be something we'd consider as one of the questions. And I also think that'll help, especially new council members, understand kind of the latitude and the limits of our work here. The other thing that I'm thinking about, and this is getting more technical, would be, as you're working with the governor's office and developing your legislative priorities and policy options, going into the next legislative cycle, are there certain things that need to happen first in this strategic plan? Because some of it will overlap with 2025. Again, another wondering for me that we may need to keep in mind as we're going through this document.
Yeah, thank you. I like this sort of revisiting it with this like time frame lens and viability. Those two things. I mean, it didn't feel like this particular document was the right stage to do that, but I think that makes perfect sense as a next step. I think we could probably, I don't think we would do that prior to the council meeting, but maybe I think we would actually, I like that idea and I'll talk with Brian, but I feel like maybe we want to sort of provide that as a, hey, this is one of our next steps is to sort of do this work and then figure out how to bring folks in. I have a couple of other prompts. We probably didn't put enough time in for this particular discussion, although I think we can tighten up on other parts of the agenda. I want to give the folks the floor for another minute or two, and then there's a few more questions that might tie back into some of this as well that I'll get ready to post in the chat. Also, there was a question, Zan, that, I see you're unmuted, so I'll let you speak, and then I have a question for you as well.
Finish chewing my bite. I'm just looking again at that diagram with the YD in the middle and thinking that there are several of those that are programmatic areas and they overlap, but grant programs that include youth engagement and justice and prevention. Maybe if we can divide things out by grant programs and such. And then there are some cross-cutting themes. The cross-cutting themes of equity and council role, youth need, that we should be considering no matter which program we're looking at. The evaluation and impact is another one. And somehow this is sort of unidimensional. And if we think about it in multidimensional space, there are those programmatic areas and then what we're trying to achieve in those areas and trying to achieve across all of the areas. Is that making any sense?
It does. I mean, I think I should acknowledge that the 8 categories and the naming of the 8 categories is definitely probably one of a number of ways that things could have been bucketed. So, they're not meant to be like exclusive, like the things in here are the only things that are really addressing X, or it's really more of just like trying to name a theme for stuff that felt related. I mean, I could see how like evaluation and impact and grant programs are things that would be closely connected. But it felt like there was enough of a cluster of things that were specifically about evaluation. I was like, well, let's make this its own thing. I mean, justice and prevention was one that actually emerged in some subsequent work with staff where
Mhm.
Anya and her team, we kind of looked at, there's stuff that is, I mean, federally mandated, or things that are just part of our statutory work around JCP that we kind of have realized over time that like we always have to sort of keep that stuff in the mix because it's easy for that to be eclipsed because our role around juvenile justice and in the justice sphere sometimes can get lost since we're fairly small and not one of the big players in that work. So it was just kind of a way of like highlighting that portion of the work. So there are maybe rationales behind these groups that also like there's a lot of bleed through. I think there are things that could be categorized differently, or that, I mean, I think you're right, like youth needs sort of permeates everything we do. I mean, youth needs in this case was really meant to address like the conversations around homelessness, substance use disorder, and behavioral health. And just that those particular like youth's deepest needs is I think the long title. That was a theme, that felt like worth kind of calling out as one thing, but it might attach to other parts of the work.
That makes sense. And, I don't want to get it down the rabbit hole. I understand that this was an organic evolution that came out of the 2 days of retreat and then the discussions afterwards. I'm just thinking about how to try and put them into buckets I can think about. And that's fine. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole any further.
We'll save some time. We can always re-embark on that rabbit hole. I dropped the other questions because one of the questions that Brian and I were talking about this in the last plan, we had these 3 categories that were the overarching 3 bodies of work that plan had: community capacity and justice, system alignment and transformation, youth voice and resilience. And that was something that was sort of evolved out of all the strategies and all the actions we named in the last plan. And one of the questions is like, do these 3 goals still, does this graft onto what we have here? Does this still make sense? Do we want to try to work towards kind of maintaining these overarching goals? Do they still make sense? Right before that, the other question was, committees and where they fit into this. And I kind of have that question because I think it seems like the Policy Rules and Research Committee could to some extent be a place where some of this work with council could happen, and other folks obviously not on the committee but from the council could certainly come, and we could just use this as a platform. So those are kind of the other questions that we want to sort of put to the whole council: is there committee work to sort of like dig into some of this and plan some of the next work with the council, and also like as we're trying to make sense of this, does it make sense to look at the preceding plan and the way that we framed things there? Is that helpful, or does it just make it more complicated?
As I'm kind of reflecting on the themes from the previous plan, for me personally, I see some value in just reflecting on like where we've been and where we're going, and could see some opportunity to consider how did the different overarching goals we set to accomplish in the previous plan, where is there alignment? How are we building on that work, or what scope of work could potentially be new as a result of our latest process? And then also providing some sort of general summary about what we accomplished as a result of the previous plan and where more work might need to be done. And I think that it could help with a lot of education of council members too, and just understanding over the last several years, what kind of impact the council and YDO has had. So those are some of my initial thoughts there.
Yeah, I think when we did the presentation at the retreat, like there was a couple of slides where it listed all the things that did get accomplished, but it might be good to actually turn that into something that is, I mean, besides 2 slides that flash by for 2 minutes, maybe like a document that actually like kind of captures like, hey, like 3 years in, here's what we've achieved. we can again we also listed what we didn't achieve, and we could even bring in from the retreat there was some prioritization of the incomplete work. So we could kind of put that filter over it in terms of here are the things that we didn't achieve yet, and these are the things that really the council has indicated in the retreat are most important to continue working on. But I mean, I think the thing I thought, as I look at the three goals, like the youth voice and resilience was the area where we did struggle the most. Candidly, I think that was hard, and we didn't really achieve the same number of things in that category, particularly around a youth engagement plan, our ambitious goals around youth membership. I think that we have done work in that area, but I think that was the one that was the hardest for us to make a lot of strides on. And that could actually be something to think about, is like, do we need to kind of just look back at what was the hardest to do and really hone in on the things that have been a struggle? Because I think a lot of that stuff is still in, like, those things that weren't accomplished find their way back into the new into the set of priorities that I shared.
I think that youth voice and resilience is always going to be important, given that it's at the center of the mission for our work. And I think we should look particularly hard at that bucket and what were the barriers and how can we address them differently. I think we also need to give ourselves some credit for all the youth engagement granting that we're doing, and that some of the work is happening not at our scale, but at other, in a more dispersed way across the geography, and include some of those successes as well. But thinking about how to, I think, maybe build off of leadership that may be emerging at that local level and bringing it to the council level would be a good idea. My sense is, and I missed that first day of the retreat, that when it comes to systems alignment and transformation, that's one thing you all at YDO have done really well, and you've made great progress on. But you're going to have to tell us too how much more is left to do in that arena, and how much of that is YDO work and how much of that is council work, what we can do to help.
Thanks, Anne. I think that my sense is that I'm very limited in how much I'm supposed to say about the POPs that we have proposed. But I will say that one of our POPs that the governor's office is reviewing relates to our desire for more capacity to support youth engagement, youth council members, and the cross-pollination of effective youth engagement and leadership practices at the local level across state agencies with youth advisory groups and in our own house. We shall see what happens with this idea, but that came out of I mean, some of this reflection as we were finalizing our POPs. It felt like that was a real need, that it's very hard for us to invest the capacity given our current demands on the team, and what our skill sets are, to really dive into that deeply. And sorry, thank you, Melissa. POP is policy option package, so that's a financial ask. So a POP, the agencies can put them forward to the governor's office, and if approved, they would find their way into the governor's budget and be things the governor would support and the agency could support in the long legislative session in 2025. So I'm hoping we're going to hear back about our POPs next month. I think that was the timeline given to us a while back. So maybe more to come. But yeah, that I think makes sense, though, is to sort of, particularly for folks who are joining the council now and hadn't had the benefit of the being involved in the previous plan development or seeing some of the work that happened. It feels like that has to happen alongside this, is just really keeping a view to what we've accomplished and where we're struggling. I'm working on this practice of like letting the meeting be quiet for a bit in case someone else wants to jump in. It's hard for me. If there are no more thoughts right now on this, certainly we can talk more about it if you have a chance to look at the document more and do want to connect prior to the council meeting, I'm happy to do that. But I think maybe at this point, I would just say that we'll have more discussion on the 14th. And we can maybe talk a little bit about this Policy Rules and Research Committee purpose statement that I have drafted and see how folks think of it. So I think every other committee has a purpose statement that at least informally has been adopted by that committee. This committee back when we started to develop something, we had a few meetings where one of the topics was this, what are the things that we as a committee want to do? And there were some scraps and bits and bobs that got pulled together, but we never actually came back to you and said, here is a draft purpose statement for folks to reflect on and for us to potentially adopt. So I feel like the chat, it might be a little long for the chat, so I will share my screen and I have it in a document here so folks can read it. So I'm gonna share my screen and I'll just go silent for a sec so folks can read it.
Cord, I did try putting what I think is a shareable link in the chat, but certainly let me know, folks, if that link does not work. I can also email it again in that same email thread. It worked? Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Parsa.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
We give it one more minute and then if folks want to share some of their thoughts or responses to this. Okay, I'm hoping everyone's had a chance to read through it. Maybe to start, any initial reactions? Anything surprising? Does this feel good? Are there any things here that you think are particularly right on the money or don't really seem to fit for you?
The only one that surprises me is that I'm not familiar with is advising on and participating in focused work groups on specific YDO areas of interest and work.
Sure, that one, I think that I had to rewrite it because it wasn't that clear in the notes, but one of the ideas we had was that there were um, prior to the current committees, there was, for example, a workforce committee, and then I think it became the workforce and re-engagement committee. And aside from juvenile justice, there are now no committees that are specifically focused on a body of work of the agency. So um, the thought was if we needed to say work on us, let's say we're trying to implement a new type of grant, or I mean, the examples we gave here, like, do we need to do some council related work on re-engagement? This is probably kind of maybe be where some rulemaking could be tied in, that it just felt like this would be the committee where we might say, hey, there's an issue that needs to get some attention. Can we essentially, in the same way that we might use it for strategic planning, like use this committee as sort of a platform for bringing in additional folks or other council members to work on something? If that feels like it starts to really like bleed out of scope, I don't know that that has to be in there, but it did seem like this might be the place we would do that if we needed a subject matter related work group.
That makes sense. And I think that as a first place to bring up those kinds of issues and the work needed, it makes sense. It also could be that we just want to create short-term working groups as needed that are comprised of those council members that are most interested to address a particular program.
Thanks. And yeah, I mean, I think maybe it's like this would be the place to sort of recommend that happen, to say I think we need to have this turn into some other body of work. And so it wouldn't necessarily require that the committee all participate in that, but maybe that this would just be a place to sort of launch the ship. As I think you've kind of said, Zan, I think that feels good.
Two questions I had are, one was around providing legislative and budget testimony. Because I don't recall in the past whether or not this particular committee has done that. Because if I remember correctly, it's usually staff that would go up and testify and provide that testimony before a committee, for example. So I'd be curious, what's the latest thinking on that? And then I have another question about the same section that Zan was asking about.
I think, Brian, maybe you might have thoughts on this as well, but um, in the past, it's sort of been just like we've like with budget, like I think we asked the council, for a letter in the past. We've had a few individual council members, provide testimony on budget or on other pieces of legislation. I know, usually our juvenile directors sometimes will address things specific to their work. But I think the thought was, if we are trying to implement some of the goals from the new strategic plan around council advocacy, maybe this committee would be a place where some of that work could be headquartered. So, if we're going to try to actually do more training around advocacy and be more intentional around the council, participating in the legislative process in that way, then maybe this committee is a place for that to happen. So that one's maybe a little bit also kind of like aspirational, more so than reflecting work the committee has done previously.
Thank you. That's really helpful to think about. And with that, I was also thinking this committee could, provide recommendations to the full council on, where some of our legislative advocacy could be impactful, as, part of that conversation as well. And then my next question was the collaboration with outside funders. I was curious what the thinking was around that, and what previous work had been done before.
Do we have that in here? I apologize. I should know that if that's in here, but I don't see it.
It's after, it's in parentheses on the second to
Oh.
last point.
I see that. Thank you.
Word, I can jump in. I mean, Parsa, historically, and I'll try to be quick because I know we have 15 minutes. I understand that, we've often had a sort of seat at the table when there are like foundation and philanthropic kind of funders roundtables, and I've gone to a few of those meetings kind of early in my tenure. Those, as far as I can tell, aren't often with like private foundations and sort of youth and family serving philanthropy. Haven't attended much of that lately, but it happened, a bit in the sort of early pandemic, and I think it was happening on and off over the years under previous directors. I think that there's opportunity, no surprise to any of us, right? Even at a state agency level, the work we did to kind of align with some of the Oregon Youth Authority and its one of its more sort of pass-through funding, just to align like the application process, but the System of Care Advisory Council does some grant making. So I think both sort of public and private entities that are doing grant making, there's lots of opportunity. We need to decide whether we want to be a convener or not, what tables exist, or not. But there's some past history there, and I think that as we think about bridge funding for when our grantees have delays in the fall because of right, like, and or just how might we think about dollars when instead of I'll just throw this example out, like what if we said, hey, you can apply for YDD funding over the course of a couple of biennia, or maybe we even have a longer grant period, assuming the legislature approves our budget, but you get a 5-year grant, but after that 5th year, you need to take a break. So if there are small things or big things that we decide to do, that alignment between funders, right, could be even more important. And then just those are great opportunities, right, for us to also think for our grantees to be thinking about how it's just not that we're not we're one source of funding, but there need to be others, and we're talking to each other so that they know that you built a thing with the state, and now you're going to take it to or maybe you helped get it to a new level with our funding. Now let's think about how you move into private foundations or individuals, or right, all those ideas.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and thank you for that context, Brian. I've never had the opportunity to be able to be a part of those different conversations, and so I think it's helpful to see what has been done in the past and the potential to, jumpstart that back up moving forward, as we see opportunities to better braid and streamline funding, but also thinking about, for lack of a better term, stopgap funding for the in-between times, right? So thank you for that.
I think I see another opportunity there, and that is that as we collect demographic information about our programs, about need, and involve more youth voice, I think that Youth Development Oregon should be looked to as a source of information for some of those other funders. And really help steer some of what that private philanthropy is doing to fill the gaps in our programs. So I think that there's a role to play as a leader and partner.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Brian, for jumping in. Sorry, I got pulled for a second there. One other thing I want to ask about this, I know we're running short on time. The research in Policy Rules and Research Committee, I think was meant to sort of capture that there used to be a data committee. I think it was maybe Data and Research. I can't recall its name, but that committee was sort of another that sunset among the previous batch, and it felt like that work needed a home, and so we pulled it in here. But as you can see, there's a lot around policy. The rules piece was also something that we talked about in a previous meeting. Some of the committee members were not that keen on rules development. And my thinking is that this is just a committee where we might sort of update you on our development of rules. We'll still be doing the full rules process with the full council. But it almost, I guess the question I have is it too much? Does it just like too much scope for this committee to be both policy focused and focus on rules and legislation in that capacity, and also be the home for data and research, which is like a pretty big body of work that I don't think we really even touched much at all in our discussions in this committee so far.
Given that
Yeah.
I serve also on the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Committee, I think that frankly that the research component fits with that group also. We need all of that demographic data and outcome data, success data for that the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Committee to really do its job. Perhaps research fits there.
The other thing I would offer too is knowing that the legislative work kind of ebbs and flows with session. But there is potentially a lot around planning, right? But I wonder, depending on the rule review cycle and the timing of the need for rules, and then the timing of session, are there ways to kind of like cycle in the work when it's timely and relevant for discussion, and then maybe cycle away from it for a little bit, but not forever? But I totally get your point, Cord, in what you raised in terms of capacity, because we want to make sure that the data and research component has the time and intention that it needs, because it also helps inform the policy work in a lot of other areas as well. So that's really helpful for us to think about a little bit more.
Zane, did you have another thought, or is your hand just pinned? Thank you both. I've noted that stuff in our notes. I think I'm curious, Melissa, do you recall for the other committees, was the process after maybe discussion to then share a draft of the purpose statement out with the committee to get any additional feedback and then sort of adopt it at the following meeting? Is that how we should do this?
I think that sounds like a good path forward. My memory is not serving me super clearly on the other ones. I think it was similar though, where there's a discussion when we're together and then we can compile the notes and send it out.
Okay. We'll work on following up, and maybe we can sort of include these sort of questions around like in and out of scope, and that work cycle is, I think, a good question. But I also, maybe we should talk with the other, I think the Equity and Disparity Committee as a place where the data is perhaps more of a consistent topic, and also where our data folks are, I mean, Bill is in that staffing that committee, so that might make more sense. Given that we've got about 7 minutes left, should we try to do a turbo legislative update? At the beginning, I said to Parasa that I would let council go first. I will actually very quickly just tell you one quick thing, and then I'm going to open it up to the council members here. The session is fairly light for the division. We've been named in a couple of bills. There's the immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeker student success plan. The division, as with the other success plans, would have a seat on that advisory committee. The education omnibus bill in the Senate includes another attempt at the Youth Advisory Committee. Parsley, you may know more about that. I'd love to hear more about it from your perspective. The big, not surprise, but a little bit of a surprise. So the city of Gresham, as folks may know, Gresham has been direct awarded funds by the legislature, which passed through us for their East County Metro outreach, prevention, and intervention program, which funds, but it was originally $2 million for this biennium for community-based programs addressing youth violence and gang involvement. They were asking for an extra $1 million for this biennium in the short session. They coupled that ask with some other asks related to Measure 110, and sort of connected it to the fact that gang violence is often related to drug trafficking. And the legislature said, wow, like that is actually pretty compelling. And one of Gresham's staff has recently become a gang prevention staff person for the city of Portland. And they came and said, hey, if we got even more money, we could expand this into Portland city limits all the way up to 82nd. And so now there's an allocation. I just found this out yesterday, and I just talked with Gresham's folks today, $2.5 million now, in addition to the $2 that's already on the books, to expand the program to serve all of East Portland as well as Gresham. And Gresham would be partnering with the city of Portland, is my understanding now of the plan for that. In terms of division work, we just administer the funding. We get reports from the city of Gresham, meet with them. This doesn't actually impact our capacity at all, but it's pretty exciting in terms of just the level of investment to try to help young people and keep them out of the system and keep them safe. So we're watching that. It's that funding bill. I can tell you the number for that is HB 5204, sponsored by Rep. Ruiz, who has been a big proponent of this, and Representative Prop. So we're going to watch that, but I think that is likely to happen. So it's not necessarily affecting our competitive grants or anything like that, but it is just more investment in young people in East Metro. And I'll pass it over to Parasa and anyone else from the council who wants to talk about legislative updates.
Thanks, Cord. And that's great news to hear about that being in the budget bill for East Multnomah County, and potentially a partnership between Gresham and Portland. So real quick, what I'll mention about the Youth Advisory Group is with it being in the Senate Education Omnibus package and there being a lot of momentum behind it, we're really hopeful. And when I spoke with Senator Dembro's staffer, they have gotten the green light to incorporate a -3 amendment to it. So be on the lookout for that. And our understanding is that it'll be scheduled in the subcommittee for capital construction for Ways and Means as it kind of moves through the process. But because it's such a large bill with over 50 sections, it impacts a lot of different agencies and departments. So they're working to make sure they're dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's before that is scheduled. So this will be the 6th time and attempt of the Youth Advisory Group. It's gone through many iterations. And again, I feel very hopeful this session. And I'm just kind of crossing my fingers right now. We're doing as much as we can to get it through the finish line.
Amazing. Fingers crossed for that. Any other bills you want to call our attention to, or anyone else? For better or worse, we're not getting another $10 million this short session. So it's a little bit chill, but still some cool things may be happening. I don't see any members of the public. I don't think anyone ever joined us.
That is correct.
Is that correct, Melissa?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the interest of honoring everyone's time, I will pass it back to Zan if you'd like to adjourn the meeting.
Hey, can I just before we adjourn, I know we got 2 minutes, but I don't know, Jenny, I just appreciate your being here. I know you're sitting in and listening, but if there's just wanted to, maybe I'm putting you on the spot, but if there's any questions or comments, thank you for being here, and feel free to chime in.
Thank you. Yeah, it was good to listen. I think with my my work position, I will not be on this committee permanently, but it's good to just know what the committee is up to. I'm very interested in the collaboration with funders. So if that's a way that I can plug in to this committee and maybe do some like an ad hoc work group, I would be happy to participate in or talk with you more about that. It's great to hear the news about Gresham and East Portland. That is music to my ears. Yay. So needed. And maybe can be a model, you know, for future work. So thanks for letting me listen in.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny, for joining us.
Okay, thank you to all of you who attended today. Look forward to the next session and continuing our discussions after the full council meeting. And at this time, I will adjourn the meeting of this very long titled committee. And at 1:59 p.m.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye.
you too. Good to
Thanks,
see everyone.
everyone.